Hello, this is Bruce Ramsey. The date today is February 2nd, 1991. No, February 1st, 1991. And what I'm about to read to you is my book, Newtin As a Man. It's a novel. And I started writing it in the spring of 1987. It was founded in the spring of 1987. And I began writing it July 7th, 1987. This is the 14th Newtin novel that isn't apocryphal. Okay. And the first story that I'm about to read to you is called The Sun. The Sun. Coming up. "Hello, hello, hello," said Newtin to his crew as he entered the bridge of his famous ship Mutania. "Hello," said Mason of the Koba in Sheena. "Hello, Newtin," said Zeeb, a robot in the shape of a very attractive girl. Zeeb was the only human-shaped robot on Mutania. "What have you been doing?" asked Sheena. "I was staring at the wall," replied Newtin. "Weren't you playing chess?" asked Mason. "Yes, and I'm getting tired of the computer beating me." "Our computer." Newtin quit in mid-sentence, then walked over to his throne. He looked up at the stone bird statue that sat. He looked up at the stone bird statue that sat above his throne and said, "You know something? I'm getting really tired of this stupid thing constantly staring down at us. How long have I had this? How long have I had it up? How long have I had it up there? How long have I had it upon my throne?" "It's as old as Mutania, Newton," said Mason. "You used to force us to worship it." "Zintar forced you to worship it, not me." "Why have you kept it aboard all these years, then?" asked Zeeb. "It ended up becoming a symbol of me and my ship. It's gone through so much, weathered so many storms, that I got attached to it. It symbolizes strength and durability, but I must admit, I think I'll take it down." And Newtin shocked his crew by taking down the bird and putting it into the room where Bruno used to be. Man, it's hard to believe that Bruno used to live in this cramped little place, thought Newtin. Newtin thought of the big, powerful idiot named Bruno, who Newtin kept locked up in the room to keep him from harming others. Bruno was Newton's pet hobby. The powerful retard was actually programmed to kill all human life forms from the assembly of geniuses who tried to kill Newton. And Newton spent most of his leisure time trying to deprogram the idiot's killer instinct, but was unable to. He was really unable to. Bruno finally died of a heart attack 5 years ago at the age of 75. Realizing that made Newton feel old. He was now approaching 90. Newton wasn't bothered by old age at all, because he didn't age. His crew looked like the semi-young, semi-spry age of 30 because they didn't age either due to taking anti-aging drugs. Newton didn't age because of his mutant system, but although he wasn't aging, Newton was getting bored. He walked into the bridge of his ship and sat down into his throne, trying to think of something to do. "Gosh, Newton, what's the matter? You look depressed," said a concerned Sheena. Newton slumped over in his throne and said, "I'm bored. I don't think I can recall ever being more bored. I feel as though I have lived 50 million years, experienced everything, and have now become very, very tired." "Hear, hear," shouted Mason. "I'm bored too." We're out bored," said Obakoba. "What do you think will cure it?" asked Sheena. Newton stumbled around the bridge of his ship, yawning from the extreme boredom that was bothering him, and suddenly he stood very still. "What are you thinking of?" "What you thinking of?" asked Koba. Suddenly Newton hit himself across the face with his might, snapping his head to the side, and causing him to hit the floor in a daze. He quickly snapped out of it and jumped into his throne, almost breaking it. Then he shouted to his little crew, "My crew, see that very bright star in the middle of our viewing screen? I want Mason to take this ship to that star. I want Mason to take Mutania to its fastest speed. I want it to its maximum. I want this ship to travel at its highest limits," shouted Newton. The crew didn't know what to think, but they went to their stations and started increasing Mutania's speed. Warp 2, said Sheena. The engines of Mutania began to increase in frequency. "Warp 3, said Sheena again. "Take it to its fullest limits. Take it to its full limits," shouted Newton. "Warp 4 and increasing. Warp 5, Warp 6, Warp 7. "Don't you think it would be wiser to have checked the warp engines?" shouted Mason frighteningly. Newton didn't respond, but just stared wildly at the viewing screen. "Warp 8, shouted a frightened Sheena. "Newton, we haven't checked the warp engines yet. They might blow up," yelled Mason. "Full intensity," screamed Newton. Mutania's warp engines became louder and louder. "Warp 10, whimpered Sheena. "Warp 10, Warp 11. Newton stared wildly at the star on the viewing screen. The star was a quasar. "Warp 13, cried Sheena. Full intensity, screamed Newton. The warp engines became louder and louder. Mutania flew faster and faster. The crew of Mutania stared at the star that suddenly began to grow larger on the viewing screen. "Newton, Mutania's hull temperature is rising. The heat from the quasar." "It's the heat from the quasar," shouted Koba. Newton stared wildly at the approaching star and shouted, "Put on deflector shields. Warp 18. Warp 18, warp 19, warp 20. Sheena looked at Newton with a worried look on her face. Newton's hands were grasping the edges of his throne so tightly that he began to crush the hard ivory. It's getting hot," shouted Mason, beginning to sweat. "The heat from the quasar is getting through our shields now. We're traveling too fast for them to work." "Warp 30, shouted Sheena. Suddenly, the bridge of Mutiny began to vibrate and hum. "Newton, it's getting hot," shouted Obakoba. Mason looked at the generator room and shouted, "Newton, the generator." Newton quickly looked at the side and saw the generator, and looked to the side and saw the generators in the generator room beginning to glow red. "Warp 30.8, screamed a terrified Sheena. "Newton, we can't go any faster. We have already passed Mutinia's limits by 10 points. Newton, please make us stop," shouted Mason. Newton leaped up quickly and stood up, staring at the fast approaching quasar. He held out his hand. The warp engines were so loud now that Newton wasn't even able to hear Mason's frantic words. The generators were now glowing yellow hot. "Warp 31!" shrieked Sheena. Suddenly, the generators became so incredibly hot that sparks, electrical fires began to shoot out of the generator room. "Cut power!" shouted Newton. Mutania's ear-shattering generator engines began to die down. "Warp 20, Warp 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Sheena gave the countdown with relief. Dang God, said Obakova. "We are now traveling at impulse and dropping," said Sheena. A few seconds later, Mutania was just traveling at a slow pace through space at 2 million miles per second, 2 miles per hour, 200, at 2 million miles per hour. Slow pace. "Snap on the cooler," said Newton quickly to Mason. Mason told Newton that it was already on. The crew quickly went into the generator room to put out the electrical fires. When the fires were out, they entered the bridge and sat down at their stations. "It's still quite hot in here," said Sheena with sweat pouring down her cleavage. "Why aren't we getting any cooler in here? Isn't the cooler working?" asked Newton. Newton then noticed that his crew looked frightened. He looked up at the viewing screen and quickly realized why it was so hot inside Mutania. It was because Mutania was quickly falling into the quasar. Newton, it isn't our generator. It isn't our generators that were causing this heat. It's the quasar," shouted Mason with fear. "Well, then turn us about. Don't let us fly into it," shouted Newton with anger. He looked up at the viewing screen and saw the quasar fill the entire view. They were only a couple of light years from the quasar, but the sun was so huge that it was putting out intense blasts of heat at Mutania. Its crew, except for Newton, felt like they were going to go insane from the high radiation and heat. Mason screamed and shouted, "It's 150 degrees in here. Mutania's outer hull is starting to get soft. Our deflector shield is shielding us from 3 million degree heat. And it's climbing." Mason had a crazed, insane look on his face as he tried to turn the ship around. Suddenly, insane terror gripped the whole crew when Mutania didn't respond to Mason's steering and continued to dive into the quasar. "Lord help us! Lord help us!" prayed Obakova. Sheena screamed. The temperature began to rise quickly inside the ship. Newton flew out of his throne and knocked Mason away from the controls. "Heaven no," he said. He cried as he tried to turn Mutania around. "What the hell's happened?" Newton saw Obakova walking about the bridge in a daze, looking up at the ceiling, trying to keep his mind clear. Sheena just sat at her stations and cried. The thermometer was now passing the 200 mark. Sweat was pouring out of Newton's crew. Newton shouted out, "Forgive me." Suddenly, the control panel to the cooling system began to flare up with electrical fires shooting out of it. The camera that was showing the sun on the viewing screen began to start melting, causing the viewing screen to become fuzzy. Then a horrible thing began to happen. The deflector shield's control panel began to start smoking. Electrical fires began to pop out of the sides. It was now 260 degrees on the bridge. Right when his crew was about to lose their mind, Newton pressed the button to the automatic steering and steered Mutania away from the great star, and began to turn away from it, but the ship was so close to the quasar that its radiation quickly ate away at the shields until nothing was left. Mutania then began to shake violently from the intense quasar activity. So hot were its waves that Mutania's outer hull began to melt. Mutania now looked like a burning comet with a fiery tail. "We're not going to make it. We're not going to make it," said the robot Zeeb. Newton then found a connection to the generator. Mutiny quickly warped away from the quasar at warp 3. His crew were passed out on the floor of the bridge, but they were safe. This next story I'm about to read is called Old Stomping Grounds. Out on the barren terrain of a moon in the galaxy, Newton and his crew beamed down on it in spacesuits and saw the space station city where their old friends were. This moon was the moon Newton had become a mutant on, and it had been years since he and his crew were last on it. Obacopa smiled and said, "Here's where it all started. What do you think, Newton?" The space station city looks deserted. I don't see any lighted rooms in the buildings. Do you think we should have called first? Asked Sheena. I mean, since the war we had with the cheetahs, apes, and Scots, spaceship travel is in this region of the galaxy is about zero. No, it's not that reason, said Newton. It's all the other civilized planets that I destroyed. Later, we made this part of space uninhabited. I just wonder if anyone is here at all, said Newton, feeling kind of depressed. I think we should have called first, said Mason. A few minutes later, Newton and his crew walked up to the bottom of the girder that belonged to his younger clone's space station. This station was the oldest part of the city. The whole station city was dark, cold, and creepy, with nothing inviting about it. Obacopa turned toward Newton and said, "This whole place is a ghost town. No one is here." Suddenly, Newton and crew saw a light in one of the rooms at the bottom of a five-story building. They started for it and became shocked and frightened to see an old man walk out in front of their view from behind the corner of the building without a spacesuit. The old man smiled and said, "Take off your helmets. You don't need them." Newton's crew thought it was a ghost that was trying to kill them, but when Newton took off his helmet to test the old man, he found out that the old man was telling the truth. The man had an atmosphere. The moon had an atmosphere. Then Newton realized that the reason why it did was because the moon and the ape planet it orbited was now traveling through a part of space that was that was pure breathable air. It was that time of year when the planet and the moon they were on would pass through a gigantic planet that had pure air. Newton told his crew that they could take off their helmets also, and they did. "How long will the moon have breathable air?" asked Sheena. 2 days, said the old man. "We pass through the air planet very quickly. Once we pass through it, it rapidly floats off the moon and gets sucked back to the planet, to the air planet. The moon just isn't quite big enough to hold it down from the planet." Newton and his crew realized that the old man sounded an awful lot like Sergeant Storm. The old man squinted his eyes and said, "Say, you aren't who I think you are you?" "Storm?" asked Newton. To the old man. "Newton?" shouted an aged Sergeant Storm. "Newton? It's been years. It's been years, decades since we last saw each other," said the happy Storm. Is the universe still out to get you?" "I'll tell you all about it," laughed Newton. An hour later, the crew of Mutiny and Storm were in the room with the lights on. Newton told Storm about how the how he had killed the black mutant by sending it into a non-existent time void. He also told him that when he had killed the mutant, the entire universe finally accepted him for the way he was, and that they thought about and that they thought about him as a hero instead of an enemy. He also told Storm that he was able to go anywhere he and his crew wanted to go without being attacked. The universe finally called upon an end to vengeance, and I and my ship are now welcome. Good night, Grandma. And I and my ship are now welcome. Where is the rest of the crew? Asked the old Storm. Mutinia's crew looked down, feeling depressed. The black mutant got them, said Newton. Killed them? Asked Storm. After the horrible deaths of the others were told, Storm said, I guess you are wondering if I'm the only one on this moon. Are you? Asked Sheena. Storm walked over and poured himself some coffee and then said, I'm the only one on this moon. What happened to the others? What happened to the others? Asked Obakoba. Well, since you asked, your clone Jeff Long 2 got bored, felt he was wasting his time on this dust ball, and decided to get married. He now lives on the planet Kumba and has about 13 children. Doug Davis got really bored. He was the first to leave and just decided to go to the planet Namod. There are a lot of girls on Namod, pretty girls, and he said that was the place for him. There was a long pause from Storm. What happened to my clone? Asked Newton and Mason at the same time. Mason too, huh? He suffered from an accident and died. Died around the time people started leaving the space station city. They started leaving Lunaton after the Cyclones decimated it. You mean it was the Cyclones that made this place a ghost town? Asked Mason. It helped, said Storm. Although you and Mutania managed to kill off every one of those horrible monsters, people were just too afraid to want to live and work here. They thought that since the Cyclone disease flared up years before it, they weren't about to stick around and wait for a third flare-up of those devils. Not only that, but since you had wiped out so many civilizations that were trying to kill you, Newton, spaceships hardly ever came by this area. And it gets awfully boring here. That's why most of the people left. How did Mason 2 die? Asked Mason. Let's see. It was a freak accident. I mean, really freaky. He didn't really die, but started wasting away every time he'd take a shower. He'd notice a gooey green substance clogging the drain. He examined the goo and found it to be radioactive. He then became obsessed to find out who was putting the goo in his shower water. He began thinking it was the Lake Callisto too, being that he began thinking it was Lake Callisto too, being that Callisto never liked him. What happened to Callisto? Asked Newton quickly. He eventually succumbed to radiation sickness. What? Asked the puzzled Newton. Of course, don't you remember when he put bombs on the bottom of your space station? The radiation from the blast finally killed him. Callisto is dead? Asked Newton. We think so. You think so? Asked the puzzled Newton. Well, on the day he was supposed to have died, he left the station and went out onto the moon terrain to die. I take it you You buried his body where it fell? Asked Mason. Nope. Apparently, Costo had a place that he had picked out to die in, because his body was never found. What happened to Mason? Asked Newton, again. Sturm sat down and began squinting his wrinkled eyes. You know, he said, you know, none of us, none of you have, none of you have changed a bit since I last saw you. I don't know about myself, though. Every time I look in the mirror, I seem to see the face of an old man. I'm not getting old. I'm getting old looking, am I? The landing party looked at each other and were afraid to say. Am I getting old? Asked Storm with a shaky voice. well, you don't look young, said Obacoba. Storm looked anxious and said, but before we ever set foot on this moon, we were given injections to stop our bodies from degenerating. How come I'm aging? It's not fair. It's just not fair, said Storm with quivering, wrinkled lips. That really is strange, said Newton. How have you been keeping your sanity in the meantime? I believe it or not, I can't take it. I have been seeing myself aging, and I have been bored silly. So bored, as a matter of fact, that I have been trying to fight off my aging process by sleeping in a sleep chamber. But it doesn't seem to be keeping me from aging, because every time I wake up, I notice that I have a 3-foot-long beard. And I have used that chamber so long, yet, believe it or not, I actually think I look older than the average 85 years old of the 20th century who naturally aged. I think I look older than the average 85-year-old of the 20th century who naturally aged. What's causing me to age? I sure wish I knew. Would you like to leave this place? Asked Gina. Leave this place? Asked Storm. You bet I would, and I don't care if I get into the Guinness Book World Records for the longest stay on the moon anymore. Besides, I think I have already beaten the record, and I think I won my bet with Doug Davis, fair and square. What bet was that? Asked Newton. He betted me that I would never be able to stay on the moon till my 100th birthday. Boy, he must have bet you a lot. It was, but I don't think it's worth it now that I'm aging. All I want now is to leave. When I saw you walking into the place, I jumped for joy. Your arrival has been an answer to my prayers. What would you like to leave? Would you like to leave now? Asked Mason. I sure would. I mean, I'm starting. I'm getting tired of computer chess and video games. What I really miss is a human voice. The human voice. Yeah.